Thank you very much, and apologies to those, Paul included, who were wanting me to talk about competition in IT markets. I thought today I'd try something a little bit different, and as Brian has said, for those of you who've heard me speak in a forum like this one before, you'll know that one of my key interests is how does the public sector deliver more and better with less? And that was why back in January I published a report called Small Pieces Loosely Joined, which I've spoken about in this forum before. And that was really inspired by seeing that LGA figure which said that local government in England alone faces a £12.4 billion funding shortfall by 2020. And I thought, that's enormous, how are you going to go about it? And so I wrote that report with some of the most obvious suggestions I could think of for how you could make some headway using tech and data to approach that £12.4 billion shortfall. But of course we know, we've heard already today, there's the spending review coming up. We know that that financial pressure has not gone away. We think it's very likely that across the public sector there'll be an even greater need during the course of this Parliament to do even more with potentially even tighter budgets. So we have to keep thinking, we have to keep coming up with new ideas. And on that note, as someone who works in a think tank, I've been thinking, well, where do we go next? And that's why today I would like to treat you as guinea pigs. I hope you don't mind to try out this new title, Digital Nudge and the Peak Demand Problem in Public Services. All will become clear in just a moment. And what I really want from this is kind of a hypothesis at the moment. This is just an idea that I've had, but you'll appreciate I'm not at the coalface like you guys. And the only way that a think tank can say sensible things is if we actually get the feedback from people who are actually doing it on the ground. So at the end of this presentation, I'd be delighted if you'd email me, get in touch via social media and say, Eddie, you're talking an absolute load of rubbish, go and choose a different idea, stick to your original titles when you're given them. Or if you can think of examples where you go, yes, this does resonate with your experience, please, please, please get in touch. I would absolutely love to hear from you. So what is this title? Where does it come from? Well, before I worked in a think tank, I don't know about you, if you've ever thought about what it might be like to work in one. I assumed it would be like this, sort of sitting around, drinking cups of tea, discussing the finer points of political philosophy with my colleagues as we stare out of the window, wistfully thinking about how government can make smarter use of technology and data. More usually, though, this is how I feel. Trying to think, how on earth, what else can I possibly say that you guys don't know about what could be done? And so, as I pull my hair out, I think, well, where do I go? Where do I go? And another reason that I tend to look like this in the office is that we have an open plan office at Policy Exchange, and there's constant noise, distraction, people interrupting you, but every now and then those distractions can be kind of helpful. Because you'll know as well as I do that when you want to try and think differently about a problem, sometimes it helps if you take the logic, the philosophy, the experience of one area and apply it to your own. And right opposite me at the Policy Exchange office sits a guy called Richard Howard, who's head of our energy and environment team. And I overheard a phone call that he had, which made me think, hang on a moment, maybe he's onto something there. And the conversation he was having was all about smart meters and how they might influence the electricity markets. And I have to start with the caveat that I know absolutely nothing about the energy sector, or at least I certainly didn't before that conversation. And in my very, very naive view, I was thinking, well, what's the big deal? What's so complicated about electricity? Like, assume you've got some demand from consumers, and over time you've just got to make sure you've got enough power stations to provide for our typical needs. And of course, this is entirely fanciful. It's not just trying to meet average demand. The big problem in electricity markets is that you need to have enough power for the commercial break during Coronation Street, or the commercial break during X Factor, or even bigger, the World Cup, when everybody across the nation goes on, switches on the kitchen light, switches on the microwave for some popcorn, and most of all, switches on the kettle. And it is hugely, hugely expensive to meet that peak, because that peak is well above average demand. Well above average demand. And if you think your average gas power station apparently costs about £350 million, a new nuclear power station costs £16 billion. So the fact that you're having to have enough electricity to meet the unlikely event that you do every now and then have that huge surge of demand, hugely, hugely expensive. And what seems to make it wasteful is that for a lot of the time, we've got this huge surplus capacity. It's just not used. In the height of summer, midweek, people are outdoors, they're not drinking cups of tea. And so, again, this is the problem with the energy sector. And Richard was saying to me, well, here's the dream, Eddie. Here's the dream. What we would love is, imagine if you could somehow even out those peaks and troughs. Imagine if we could take the peak and use it in that time where there's surplus capacity. You could deliver the same amount of energy, but with far fewer power stations. You could switch them off, decommission them. You would not have to build and invest in future power stations. This would be amazing. I said, well, that's great. How are you going to do that? And he said, like this. With smart meters, the UK being a world leader in trying to roll out about 50 million smart meters across the country over the course of the next 5 years to the next decade. And one of the ways that smart meters can help even out those peaks and troughs is by influencing consumers' behaviour. What it would allow is to have dynamic pricing of energy, so that at the peak times, during the day, you could have a higher price, and when there's less demand, you have a lower price. So I might think, well, actually, I'll switch the washing machine on at a time when actually the electricity is cheaper, and suddenly, by influencing people's behaviour, we're managing to even out, deliver more with less. I thought, well, okay, there might be something in that. So my question was, does the peak demand problem, that problem of meeting excess capacity, excess demand, exist in public services as well? Are there public services where a big amount of the cost is just there because you have to meet when everybody wants something at once? And instinctively, the answer seems to be yes. I was talking to HMRC, who are mentioning that apparently 80% of online self-assessment tax returns are submitted in the last 4 days of January. So they have to have enough server power to handle demand from all that sort of processing power, and they use in-house servers, I believe, so that's latent capacity for much of the year. They have to have enough call centre staff. They've got to have the IT to support those call centre staff. They need the team to make the sandwiches and the drinks for the call centre staff. They need the building for the call centre staff. You get where I'm going with this. They have a huge amount of capacity. Why? To meet those 4 days at the end of January. Similarly with DWP, with tax credit renewals, when you've got a deadline in July, huge amount of activity from IT to staff to resources to assets being used just to meet that peak. Think too of when you've read news articles about a crisis in A&E, when you get huge queues. When are they? Well, often they can be on Friday and Saturday evenings. Why are they there? Well, frankly, a lot of those people are there because maybe they had one too many drinks. I understand perhaps there were some of you last night, don't have to advertise who you are. Had gone out, drunk too much, maybe had an accident, maybe got into a fight, I hope that wasn't the case here, maybe just drunk so much alcohol that you needed medical treatment. And so you think, well, that's a problem, see, that's a peak. I was thinking, well, how else can we try and find public services where there's a peak of demand? And you notice that you can look on Google Trends to see what people are searching for. And this might be one indication. So what we see here, it looks like a heart rate monitor, but this is Google Trends analysis. You can see what people are searching for. This is from 2005 to 2015. The peaks in people searching in the UK for the term school places. A few peaks and troughs we see there. You can bet it's around the deadlines basically applying for school places. Similarly, if you look at primary school places, it looks like I'm showing you lots of sort of ECG graphs, but again we see the same phenomenon. Let's look at UK visa applications. Again, when are people coming over here to work or coming to have a holiday in the UK? If we look at, this is admittedly not a British initiative, the European one, when you're applying for that insurance card, again for VHIC, you get very definite peaks and troughs. Recycling, let's talk about at a local level. It's less obvious what the peaks are related to, but peaks and troughs there are. And finally, let's look at disability allowance. Again, peaks and troughs. And you can bet your life that behind all of those graphs, there will be a story where public services are having to gear up to meet peak capacity that is far in advance of average use. So here's my thought. Well, if the problem is the same, might the solution be as well? Might it be that by influencing citizens' behaviour, we could try and address that peak demand problem? Hands up anyone here who's read the book on the left called Nudge by, I think, Richard Thaler, Cass Sunstein. Anyone? Good, a few. If not, strongly recommended. David Cameron read it, Obama read it, and as a result, we ended up applying its principles in something called the Behavioural Insights Team, the Nudge Unit, which has recently been documented in this book on the right by David Halpern. Absolutely inspiring book about how you can make changes in policy. And I'll explain briefly how it works. The idea of behavioural economics, behavioural insights, or nudge, it is more commonly called, is the idea that by prompting people, by communicating subtle messages, you can shift people's behaviour or the choices that they make. I'll give you some examples. If you go into a canteen, the placement of the food will influence the decision as to what you eat. So if they put lots of salad right at the front, more people will have salad. If you put the chips right in front, more people will eat chips. They noticed that if you change the wording of tax letters, that you can increase the amount of people who pay their tax on time. And all you have to do with the majority of people is insert the line, 9 out of 10 people pay their tax on time. And they did randomized control trials and realised that if you include that simple sentence, you do increase the number of people who pay their tax on time. They notice also that default settings matter hugely. How many of you have ever bothered to change the ringtone on your phone? Probably a minority of you. And similarly with things like saving for a pension, you notice as of this month, employers have to, by default, enrol you into your pension. You have to actively opt out rather than opt in. And because we're kind of all lazy, we're all busy people, the majority of people will stay opted in. A simple change massively changes an outcome. And for those of you who are wondering, well, is this all entirely ethical? As they point out in the book Nudge, it's impossible not to nudge people, whether it's the private sector or the public sector, however you present your website, however you interact with citizens, whatever choices you give them, you're giving them in some way, and however you present them will influence the way that they consume them and how they respond to them. And so you might as well do it in a way that optimises their response to the most positive outcome. And it occurs to me, so let's go back to that smart meter example. We've got an example there of technology influencing behaviour. And so I wonder that rather than just talking about nudge, should we start talking about digital nudge? Because I think I've got this device in front of me here, I bet all of you have got one as well, and constantly, based on what this thing tells me, I change my behaviour. So today I didn't bring an umbrella, which I may later rue that particular decision, but because Google told me it's not going to rain today. I'm trusting Google. I avoid certain tube stations when I head back to London. Why? Because it tells me there's ongoing engineering works and I don't want to have to queue. I eat at certain restaurants because I get push notifications with vouchers for particular sandwich shops near where my office is. So I am changing my behaviour all the time due to what I call digital nudge. So here's the thing, here's where I'm going with all of this. We have the peak demand problem in public services, I think. Could we therefore use technology, and just as smart meters influence consumption of energy, could government and local governments use technology to influence people's consumption of public services at a local level so that we can deliver the same amount of service but with fewer resources? I think the answer is you can, but first of all we need to just understand there's 3 different ways that you can have peace, and maybe some of these will resonate with you in the local government context. See what you think. First of all, you can get just fluctuating demand, just like that energy curve, in just the consumption of a standard service. And you'll notice the way to spot these is anything where you guys impose a deadline, or central government imposes a deadline. If you think of the self-assessment tax return, why is there a peak? Because there's a deadline. Tax credit renewals, because there's a deadline. Paying your council tax, there's the deadline. Store places, deadline, etc., etc., etc. So how could we go about trying to use nudge, digital nudge, to change that? Well, it occurs to me that if you understand how nudge works, David Halpern uses the acronym EAST. He says that what you do is, if you want someone to do a particular thing, you make it really easy. You remove every barrier to doing it, so it's just simple to do. You make it attractive. It can be colourful. It stands out. Big advertising poster. Do this. It attracts our attention. That's why we do it. You can make it social. You tell people something is a social norm. At heart, we're all sheep. You know, we like to conform to what others are doing. And finally, you make it timely. You prompt people at a time where they're actually in a position to make that decision. All of these things, I bet, are things that any of you who look at front-end web design or apps or any of your digital public services think about all the time. Think about making it easy. What is the digital by default standard if it's not about making processes incredibly, incredibly easy? So how about we try and think about the way we use our digital presence to make it very, very easy to use services when at times outside the peak. Think about the way that Amazon has got one-click shopping, so there's literally zero barrier to me actually completing a purchase. And you notice you're buying a lot more stuff on Amazon because it is utterly seamless to do so. We think of making it attractive. Think of the way that Google personalises its message to make it particularly bright and sparkly for you. It attracts your attention because it is about you. It knows where you are and what you are doing and is therefore able to make it attractive, potentially outside those times of peak consumption. When it comes to social, well, does technology do social? Of course it does. Social media. Although I can bet maybe somebody in the audience is thinking, well, that's not a social norm you develop in social media, because on LinkedIn, everybody is vice president of something, even if it's team linking. On Facebook, everyone is having nicer holidays, is more attractive, and has more friends than the rest of us. On Twitter, everyone is more opinionated than if you actually met them over coffee in person. So that's not a social norm. But there's other examples where we do use this. Again, think of Amazon's suggestion, people like you who did X or bought X also did Y. Again, it's you conforming to peer pressure. It's saying, oh, other people do that, well maybe I would as well. It's that social norm conveyed through technology. And finally, timely, even if as I speak, I've got a habits app where I'm trying to prompt me to drink more water, because I drink way too much coffee. It's saying, hey, I need to be drinking more water, so I'll do that immediately afterwards. But again, push notifications all the time, timely prompting me, or sending me that voucher when it knows I'm walking past the shop. Long story short, all of these things that nudge relies on, technology can do better. And so I think that if we start thinking in our digital public services, how we can use them to influence behaviour proactively, to move away from those peaks, we might just be onto something. The second type of peak is that you can get a peak of workload within a particular service. And I'll explain it by saying the biggest cost of many public services is engaged with having to deal with people who have fallen outside of the mainstream. So it is cheaper to keep someone well than it is to treat them if they were to have something, say, like type 2 diabetes later in life. It is cheaper to keep someone in education than if they fall out of education and you have to provide them with bespoke one-to-one training to get them back in. It's cheaper to keep someone in the workforce than it is to try and support them when they fall out of it. So the key example would be NEETs, young people who are not in education, employment or training. Each NEET, it is estimated, costs the state about £56,000 during the course of their lifetime in extra support, in lost tax revenue, in the extra benefits that they may require. I think of the contingent of NEETs aged 16 to 18 who were around in 2008. The estimated cost for them during the course of their lifetime to the state is between 12 and 32 billion pounds. Now, of course, this is not to mention, even to start to mention, the harm caused to the individuals themselves. It knocks their confidence. It can be bad for relationships, self-esteem, the rest. Far, far better if we keep them engaged. Well, technology is brilliant at keeping them engaged. If you think about it, any of you here played Farmville? Anyone willing to confess? There we go, at least one brave person. In Farmville, they noticed that they'll monitor your behaviour the whole time. Lots of computer games do this. When you log on the first time, maybe you'll go on 10 times a day because you're really, really keen. After a while, your enthusiasm wanes. Maybe it's 6 times, then 5 times, and after a few weeks, maybe it's only twice a day. And when they think you're just about to give up, you'll suddenly find that you stumble upon a token that boosts you up to the next level. And you're like, this is cool, and then you spend more time on it. Lots of different games do this. It's the same with health apps. I'm wearing my Fitbit, and it will give me a frowny face if I don't do my 10,000 steps today. I use Duolingo to do a bit of language training, where there is an owl as their sort of character who weeps uncontrollably if I don't do my French vocab on any particular day. And it sounds cheesy, but it works. I keep going back to it. It keeps me engaged. It makes it sticky. Technology is very, very good at sustaining engagement. How about we use those same techniques to keep people engaged in mainstream public services? We reduce the peaks of demand on the bespoke services for those who fall out of the system. And a final example, these may seem the more intractable ones. The image here is from a queue at A&E, and I mentioned this earlier. We've got a problem where, again, on those Friday and Saturday nights, you've got people turning up, potentially a substantial number because of alcohol-related incidents, and think, well, what can you do about that? You can't use an app to try and stop people from going out on Friday or Saturday nights or having accidents. And we have this problem. What are we going to do with that peak demand problem? It's serious and it's expensive. We need the nurses, the hospital beds, the drugs, everything geared up to make sure that we can meet the peak. And particularly when it's locum staff as well, even more expensive than your in-house staff. So it's not just cost rising once, twice, 3 times. It goes up exponentially. It's very, very expensive to meet the peak. What we can do though is try and think, well, who are the people that make up that peak? And if you look at it, it's not just people who have had accidents on that particular day, at that particular moment in time. There is also a substantial number of people who go to A&E who don't necessarily need to be there. And I'm talking about the 1 million people who go to the A&E every year in the UK because they couldn't get a GP appointment. Now let's drill back down. Why couldn't they get a GP appointment? Well, one of the reasons is that, again, every year in the UK, 12 million people miss their GP appointments. They just don't turn up for one reason or another. 12 million GP appointments. Think how much time that is. It wastes £162 million a year by people just not turning up. And so, if you could diminish that number at all, if you could take those people out of the equation so they weren't turning up at A&E just because they couldn't get a slot with their GP, you reduce the peak. So we think, well, okay, how do we try and make sure, let's go down the chain, how do we get people making sure they actually turn up to GP appointments? And you'll notice that some GP surgeries are already using what I would call a digital nudge technique. You'll get that text message on the morning saying, don't forget you've got an appointment at 9:30. And what we know though, this is where the nudge bit comes in, the language of that text message is hugely important. And David Halpern writes about this in his book Inside the Nudge Unit. And he gives the example of trying to encourage people who are going to Job Centre Plus to encourage them to go to jobs fairs in the following week. And he discovered that if you send a text message, yes, it does increase the number of people who turn up. But if you added the recipient's name, so, hi Eddie, there's a jobs fair, it increased the proportion turning up by 5 percentage points, or 15% of the total number. If the advisor added their own name at the bottom of the text, it went up to 18%. So, hi Eddie, don't forget that there's this jobs fair, good to see you, James. And then finally, if the advisor said, I booked you a place, good luck, including that personalisation, it went up 27%, a 3-fold increase in the number of people who responded to that prompt. So my appeal would be for public services where you are already using those little digital prompts, whether it's text messages, emails, the language matters, the way you describe it matters. There is a huge opportunity to combine the agendas of digital government with what we know about nudge to increase that positive behaviour, take people out of missing GP appointments, get them away from A&E, and then we stop part of that peak happening at A&E, reducing the cost of the service. So there we go, brief recap. In energy markets we see that peak. I think we see them in public services too. My appeal to you would be, does this problem exist in local government? Can you give me examples of where you think you are having to spend money on meeting peak capacity? If so, please, please, please do get in touch. Or if you don't, or if you can't think of one or you don't think it applies, tell me as well, and that way I will save myself several months of research, and then I'll go back to writing about competition in IT markets. I hope you've got the gist. I hope that was interesting, but for now, thank you very much indeed for listening.